I was knee-deep in laundry when I found it. A letter, yellowed with age, tucked neatly between the folds of an old quilt my grandmother had given me. I almost missed it, thinking it was just another piece of junk mail, but the familiar handwriting stopped me cold. My name is Mari, and this letter was about to change everything. The letter was from my grandmother, Agnes, who I hadn't seen in years. She wrote about a college fund she had set up for me, money she had been saving since I was a child. I could barely believe it. My heart raced as I read her words, filled with love and hope for my future. But then the reality hit me like a punch to the gut. My parents had never mentioned this. Not once. I sat there on the laundry room floor, the hum of the dryer the only sound as I tried to process what this meant. My parents, Lorraine and Roger, had always been clear about their priorities. Savannah, my youngest sister, was the golden child, the one they pinned all their hopes on. And me? I was just the helper, the one who picked up the slack. I tucked the letter into my pocket and headed downstairs, my mind buzzing with questions. When I entered the kitchen, Lorraine was at the table, flipping through a magazine, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Mom," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "Did you know about the college fund Grandma set up for me?" She looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before she masked it with indifference. "Oh, that. We thought it was best to use that for Savannah. You know how important her education is." Her words stung, each one a reminder of where I stood in this family. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my cool. "And what about me? What about my education?" Lorraine sighed, as if I was just another chore on her list. "Mari, you know we appreciate everything you do around here. But Savannah has a real future ahead of her." I felt a mix of anger and betrayal simmering beneath the surface. "I have a future too, Mom. Or at least I thought I did." She returned to her magazine, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. "We all have our roles, Mari. It's just how it is." I left the kitchen, my heart heavy with the weight of her words. This wasn't just about the money. It was about everything I had given up, everything I had been denied, all in the name of family duty. I needed to talk to someone who would understand, someone who wouldn't just brush me aside. That evening, I found myself driving to my grandmother's house, the letter clutched in my hand like a lifeline. Agnes greeted me with a warm hug, her home a sanctuary from the chaos I had left behind. "What's on your mind, dear?" she asked, leading me to the cozy living room. I handed her the letter, watching as her eyes scanned the page. "I found this today." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Agnes sighed, her gaze softening. "I wanted to, Mari. But your parents insisted they knew what was best. I never agreed with them, but, well, you know how stubborn they can be." I nodded, grateful for her honesty. "I just don't understand why they would keep this from me." "Sometimes people get so caught up in their own plans that they forget to see the bigger picture," she said gently. "But you have a choice now, Mari. You can take control of your own future." Her words resonated with me, a spark of hope igniting in the darkness. I realized then that I couldn't let my parents dictate my life any longer. I had to find my own path, even if it meant leaving everything I knew behind. As I drove home, the weight of the letter in my pocket felt less like a burden and more like a promise. A promise of a new beginning, one where I could finally be more than just the helper. I could be Mari, the woman my grandmother believed I could be. But as I pulled into the driveway, a sense of dread settled over me. I knew this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of determination, but also a knot of anxiety sitting heavy in my stomach. I knew I had to confront my parents about the letter, about everything. I couldn't keep living in the shadows of their expectations, and Agnes had given me the courage to finally stand up for myself. I found Lorraine in the kitchen, stirring a pot of oatmeal. Roger sat at the table, hidden behind the morning paper, as usual. I took a deep breath and stepped into the lion's den. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Roger grunted, lowering his paper just enough to peer over the top. Lorraine glanced up from the stove, her expression wary. Is this about last night? Lorraine asked, her tone already defensive. Yes, it is, I replied, pulling out the letter and placing it on the table. Why didn't you ever tell me about the college fund Grandma set up for me? Roger folded his paper with a sigh, setting it aside as if this conversation was an inconvenience. We thought it was best used elsewhere, Mari. You know how we feel about Savannah's education. His words were like a match to tinder, igniting the frustration that had been building inside me for years. And what about my education? What about my future? Lorraine turned off the stove, facing me with a mixture of annoyance and guilt. Mari, you've always been so responsible. We thought you'd understand. Understand what? I shot back, my voice rising. That my dreams don't matter? That I'm just here to support Savannah? Roger leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. It's not that simple, Mari. We have to think about the family as a whole. And what about me? I asked, my voice cracking. Am I not part of this family? Lorraine opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off, unable to hold back any longer. I've sacrificed so much for this family, and it feels like none of it matters. Tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Roger looked away, his jaw set, while Lorraine fidgeted with her apron, unable to meet my eyes. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice firm despite the tears threatening to spill over. I need to live my own life. Lorraine's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. Mari, wait. Let's talk about this. But I shook my head, the decision already made. No, Mom. I've made up my mind. I turned on my heel and walked out, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, but I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Later that day, I found myself at Agnes's house once more, seeking her guidance and comfort. She listened as I recounted the morning's events, her expression a mix of pride and concern. You did the right thing, Mari, she said, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. It's time you started living for yourself. I nodded, grateful for her support. I just wish it didn't have to be like this. Change is never easy, Agnes replied, her voice gentle but firm. But it's necessary. You're stronger than you realize. Her words gave me strength, but I couldn't shake the feeling of loss that lingered in my heart. Leaving home meant leaving behind my sisters, especially Eliza and Tessa, who had always been caught in the crossfire of our parents' favoritism. As if sensing my turmoil, Agnes suggested I reach out to them. They need to know you're there for them, Mari. Even if you're not living under the same roof. I took her advice to heart, sending a message to Eliza later that evening. To my relief, she responded almost immediately, expressing her own frustrations with the situation at home. It's been tough, Eliza admitted when we spoke on the phone. Savannah's oblivious, and Mom and Dad are more focused on her than ever. I sighed, understanding all too well. I'm here for you, Eliza. Always. And Tessa too. Her voice softened, grateful for the reassurance. Thanks, Mari. It means a lot. As I hung up, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I might be leaving the family home, but I wasn't leaving my family behind. I was determined to forge a new path, one where I could be true to myself and still be there for my sisters. But as I lay in bed that night, the shadows of doubt crept in. I knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and unexpected twists. Yet, beneath the uncertainty, a flicker of hope burned bright. I was ready to face whatever came next. The first few weeks after leaving home were a whirlwind of emotions. I threw myself into my studies, determined to prove that I was more than just a helper. My grandmother's letter had set me on a path of self-discovery, and I was not about to let it go to waste. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Eliza and I kept in touch regularly, our conversations a lifeline for both of us. She often spoke of the growing tension at home, the way Savannah seemed to glide through life, blissfully unaware of the chaos her presence stirred. Mari, it's like she doesn't even notice, Eliza said one evening over the phone. Mom and Dad are so focused on her they barely see the rest of us. I could hear the frustration in her voice, and it mirrored my own. I know, Eliza. But you're not alone, okay? I'm here. Thanks, she replied softly. It just feels like everything's falling apart. As comforting as it was to be there for Eliza, I knew I needed to focus on my own journey too. My studies were going well, and I was starting to see a future that was truly mine. But just as I began to find my footing, an unexpected twist threw me off balance. It was a chilly afternoon when I received a call from Tessa, my rebellious 16-year-old sister. It was rare for her to reach out, and I could sense the urgency in her voice. "Mari, you need to come home," she said, her words rushed and panicked. "What happened?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. "It's Savannah," Tessa continued. "She got into some trouble at school. Mom and Dad are losing it." My mind raced as I processed her words. Savannah, the golden child, in trouble? Seemed impossible. But the urgency in Tessa's voice left no room for doubt. "I'll be there as soon as I can," I promised, grabbing my keys and heading out the door. The drive back home felt surreal, my thoughts a jumble of worry and disbelief. I hadn't been back since I left, and the idea of returning filled me with a mix of dread and determination. Whatever was happening, I needed to be there for my sisters. When I arrived, the house was in chaos. Lorraine was pacing the living room, her face etched with worry, while Roger sat in stony silence. Savannah was nowhere to be seen, and the tension in the air was palpable. "Mari," Lorraine said, her voice a mixture of relief and desperation. "Thank goodness you're here." I nodded, trying to keep my emotions in check. "What happened?" Roger finally spoke, his voice tight with frustration. "Savannah got caught cheating on a test. The school called us this morning." I blinked, taken aback. "Cheating?" "Savannah." Lorraine nodded, her eyes pleading. "We don't know what to do. She's never been in trouble like this before." I took a deep breath, trying to process the situation. Savannah had always been the perfect child in their eyes, and now their world was crumbling around them. But beneath their worry, I sensed something else, a crack in the facade they had built around her. "Where is she?" I asked, looking around the room. "Upstairs," Tessa chimed in, her expression a mix of concern and vindication. She locked herself in her room. I headed upstairs, my heart heavy with a mix of emotions. As I reached Savannah's door, I paused, unsure of what to say. But I knew I had to try. "Savannah, it's Mari," I called gently, knocking on the door. "Can we talk?" There was a long pause before I heard the door unlock and creak open. Savannah stood there, her eyes red from crying, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. "Hey," I said softly, stepping inside. She sat on the edge of her bed, hugging her knees to her chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I sat beside her, unsure of how to bridge the gap that had always existed between us. "What happened?" Savannah shrugged, her gaze fixed on the floor. I didn't want to disappoint them. Everyone expects so much from me." Her words struck a chord, and I realized that beneath her entitlement was a girl struggling to meet impossible expectations. It was a feeling I knew all too well. "You don't have to be perfect, Savannah," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "None of us do." She looked up, her eyes searching mine for understanding. Really, I assured her. "But you have to be honest. With yourself and with them." Savannah nodded, a flicker of hope in her eyes. It was a small step, but it was a start. As I left her room, I knew the road ahead would be challenging. But for the first time, I felt a sense of unity with my sisters, a shared understanding that we were all fighting our own battles. As I headed back downstairs, I realized that the crisis had revealed something unexpected, a chance for healing and change. And while the journey was far from over, I was ready to face whatever came next, together with my sisters. Graduation day came with a bittersweet tang. I stood in my cap and gown, surrounded by classmates and their families, but the seat beside Agnes was conspicuously empty. The absence of my parents and sisters was a sharp reminder of the rift that had grown between us, yet Agnes's presence was a balm to my aching heart. After the ceremony, Agnes wrapped me in a warm embrace, her pride evident in the way she held me close. "You've come so far, Mari," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "Your future is yours to shape now." Her words resonated deeply, filling me with a sense of possibility. But as we left the campus, a nagging thought lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that my journey was just beginning, and the path ahead would require more than just academic success. Later that evening, I attended a community event, a fundraiser for local charities. It was there that I met Ethan Blake, a charismatic environmental engineer with a smile that lit up the room. We struck up a conversation, our shared interests and easy banter drawing us together like magnets. "So, what brings you here?" he asked, his curiosity genuine. "Just trying to give back a little," I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me at his attentive gaze. "And you?" "Same," he said, nodding. "It's important to support the community, you know?" As the evening wore on, I found myself drawn to Ethan's kindness and understanding. He listened without judgment, offering a perspective that was both refreshing and comforting. By the time we exchanged numbers, I felt a spark of hope for what might come next. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and I grew closer, our connection deepening with each shared conversation and laughter. He became a source of strength and support, helping me navigate the emotional complexities of my family situation. But just as I began to find solace in this new chapter of my life, an unexpected twist threatened to unravel everything. It started with a phone call from Eliza, her voice tinged with urgency. "Mari, you need to know something," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Savannah's been telling people you left because you couldn't handle the pressure." I felt a jolt of anger and disbelief course through me. "Why would she say that?" "I don't know," Eliza admitted, frustration evident in her tone. "But it's causing a lot of talk. People are starting to question your reasons for leaving." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Savannah's actions were more than just the naive antics of a teenager. They were a deliberate attempt to undermine my reputation, to cast doubt on my character. I struggled to understand her motives, the betrayal cutting deeper than I cared to admit. It seemed that even from a distance, Savannah's influence was a force to be reckoned with. Ethan noticed my distress and gently probed for answers. "You seem distracted," he observed one evening as we walked through the park. I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. But his patience and empathy encouraged me to open up. "It's Savannah," I confessed, my voice heavy with emotion. "She's spreading rumors about why I left home." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Sounds like she's trying to protect herself in a way." His insight gave me pause, forcing me to reevaluate my perspective. Perhaps Savannah's actions were born from fear of losing her place in the family, of facing the same struggles I had. "Maybe," I conceded, my mind racing with possibilities. "But it doesn't make it right." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "No, it doesn't. But it might help you understand her better." His words planted a seed of doubt in my mind, challenging my desire for revenge with the possibility of empathy. It was a concept I struggled to embrace, my instincts urging me to protect myself and those I loved. As I grappled with this internal conflict, I realized that my journey was far from over. The path to healing and understanding would require more than just distance from my family. It would demand a willingness to confront the shadows of the past and find a way to move forward with compassion. In the face of this new challenge, I knew that my relationship with Ethan would be a guiding light, helping me navigate the complexities of love, forgiveness, and family. And while the road ahead was uncertain, I was ready to face it with an open heart and a renewed sense of purpose. The proposal was everything I hadn't dared to dream of. Ethan took me to the park where we first met, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. As he got down on one knee, his eyes filled with sincerity and love, I felt a rush of emotions, joy, hope, and an overwhelming sense of belonging. "Will you marry me, Mari?" he asked, his voice steady despite the nerves I could see in his eyes. "Yes," I breathed, my heart soaring. 1,000 times yes. The moment was perfect, yet as we celebrated, a shadow loomed over the horizon of our happiness. The thought of inviting my family to the wedding was a tangled knot of anticipation and dread. I wanted them there despite everything. But I also feared their rejection would cast a pall over what should be a joyous occasion. Later, as I sat with Ethan, the weight of the decision pressed heavily on me. "I want them there," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm scared of what they'll say." Ethan nodded, his hand warm on mine. "It's your choice, Mari. Whatever you decide, I'm with you." His unwavering support bolstered my resolve, but the fear of being let down lingered like a stubborn shadow. I decided to send the invitations, extending an olive branch to a family that had often left me feeling like an outsider. A few days later, Eliza called, her voice a mix of excitement and concern. "I got your invitation," she said. "But there's something you should know." My heart skipped a beat, sensing the undercurrent of tension in her words. "What is it?" "Mom and Dad. They've forbidden us from attending," she revealed, hesitation lacing her voice. "They think you're trying to embarrass them." The news hit me like a cold wave, my hopes dashed against the rocks of their stubborn pride. "Why would they think that?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. "I don't know," Eliza replied, frustration evident. "But Tessa and I want to be there. We'll find a way." Her loyalty was a balm to my wounded heart, yet the sting of my parents' rejection was hard to shake. It felt like a confirmation of every fear I'd harbored about my place in the family. Ethan found me later, staring out the window, lost in thought. "Hey," he said softly, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "What's going on?" I leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. "They're not coming," I murmured, the words bitter on my tongue. "They think I'm trying to embarrass them." He was silent for a moment, absorbing the news. "I'm sorry, Mari," he said finally, his voice filled with empathy. "It's just, I thought maybe this could be a fresh start," I admitted, my frustration boiling over. "But it feels like nothing's changed." Then turned me to face him, his gaze steady and reassuring. "You can't control how they react. All you can do is live your truth." His words resonated, yet the pain of rejection lingered, a persistent ache in my heart. I knew I had to find a way to move forward, but the path seemed fraught with uncertainty. As the days passed, I threw myself into wedding preparations, hoping to distract myself from the turmoil within. But just when I thought I could put the family drama behind me, another twist threatened to upend everything. It was during a visit with Agnes that the next revelation came. We were sitting in her cozy living room, sipping tea, when she handed me a small box. "What's this?" I asked, curious. "Something I think you should have," she replied, a knowing smile playing on her lips. Inside the box was a set of old letters, each one addressed to me in Agnes's familiar handwriting. As I leafed through them, a pattern emerged, a series of attempts to reach out, to offer support and guidance that had somehow never reached me. "Why didn't I get these?" I asked, bewildered. Agnes sighed, her expression tinged with sadness. "Your parents thought it best to keep them from you. They wanted to control the narrative." The revelation was a gut punch, a stark reminder of the manipulation that had shaped so much of my life. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any I'd experienced, challenging my understanding of justice and revenge. As I sat there, the letters spread before me, I realized that my journey wasn't just about finding my own path. It was about breaking free from the chains of the past, about redefining what family and love meant on my own terms. With Ethan by my side and Agnes's unwavering support, I knew I could face whatever came next. The road to healing was long, but I was ready to walk it, one step at a time. The adoption process was a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings, and emotional highs and lows. Ethan and I had prepared ourselves for the challenges, but nothing could have truly readied us for the moment we met Zoe. Her wide eyes and tentative smile melted away any remaining doubts, and I knew instantly that she was meant to be part of our family. Bringing Zoe home was a new beginning, a chance to build the family I had always yearned for. Yet, as much as I wanted to shield her from the pain of my past, the shadows of my family loomed large, threatening to cast a pall over our newfound happiness. Our first trip back to my hometown with Zoe was fraught with tension. I wanted her to meet Eliza and Tessa, to connect with the parts of my family that had always supported me. But Savannah's presence was an unpredictable variable, one that filled me with unease. The family gathering was meant to be a celebration, a chance to introduce Zoe to her aunts and perhaps, just perhaps, to mend some of the fractured bonds. But as soon as we arrived, I felt the familiar weight of old grievances pressing down on me. Savannah's initial reaction to Zoe was one of curiosity, but it quickly shifted to something more insidious. Her comments, though seemingly innocuous, were laced with an edge that set my nerves on edge. "She's cute," Savannah remarked, her eyes appraising. "But isn't it weird having someone else's kid?" I stiffened, the words cutting deeper than I cared to admit. "She is our daughter," I replied, keeping my tone steady. Savannah shrugged, a smirk playing on her lips. "I guess. But, it's not the same." Ethan, sensing the tension, stepped in with his usual calm. "Zoe's part of our family now, Savannah. That's all that matters." Savannah's gaze lingered on Zoe, her expression unreadable. "If you say so." The exchange left a bitter taste in my mouth, and I could see the confusion in Zoe's eyes. I wanted to protect her from the complexities of my family dynamics, but it was clear that the past was not so easily left behind. As the day wore on, the atmosphere grew increasingly strained. Eliza and Tessa did their best to keep things light, but Savannah's presence was a constant reminder of the unresolved tensions that simmered beneath the surface. At one point, I found myself alone with Savannah, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. I knew I needed to address the elephant in the room, but the fear of confrontation held me back. "I never meant for things to get so messed up," Savannah said suddenly, her voice unexpectedly vulnerable. I turned to her, surprised by the admission. "Then why did you say those things?" She hesitated, her bravado slipping. "I don't know. I guess I was scared. Scared of losing my place." Her words struck a chord, echoing the fears I had battled for so long. It was a moment of clarity, a glimpse into the insecurities that drove her actions. But before I could respond, the door burst open and Lorraine entered, her face flushed with anger. "Mari, we need to talk," she said, her voice brooking no argument. I followed her outside, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and defiance. Confrontation I had avoided was now unavoidable, and I braced myself for the storm. "Why did you bring her here?" Lorraine demanded, her tone accusatory. "You know how complicated things are." "Zoe is part of my family," I replied, my voice firm. "I wanted her to meet everyone." Lorraine shook her head, frustration etched into her features. "You're just trying to make me look bad, aren't you?" Parading her around like some prize. The accusation stung, but I refused to back down. "This isn't about you, Mom. It's about Zoe. She deserves to know her family." Lorraine's eyes flashed with a mixture of hurt and anger. "You always have to make everything difficult, don't you?" The words were a knife to the heart, reopening old wounds that had never truly healed. I felt the weight of years of neglect and misunderstanding crashing down on me, threatening to drown me in despair. As I stood there, torn between the desire to fight and the urge to flee, a realization struck me. This was my breaking point, the moment where I had to choose between holding on to the past or forging a new path for myself and Zoe. The decision was both terrifying and liberating, a leap into the unknown. But as I turned away from Lorraine, I felt a sense of clarity and purpose that had eluded me for so long. I would protect Zoe from the pain I had endured, and in doing so, I would find the strength to heal my own wounds. With Ethan and Zoe by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next, determined to build a future defined by love and acceptance, not the shadows of the past. The day of the family gathering was bright and deceptively calm, the kind of day that belied the storm brewing beneath the surface. I had decided to face Savannah and the rest of my family, determined to protect Zoe and finally confront the unresolved tensions that had festered for so long. As we arrived, Ethan squeezed my hand, offering silent support. Zoe clung to my other hand, her bright eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. I could feel my heart pounding, but I pushed the anxiety aside, focusing on the task at hand. The atmosphere was tense as the family gathered in the living room, polite chatter masking the underlying unease. Savannah was there, her expression guarded, while Lorraine and Roger maintained a cool detachment. Eliza and Tessa hovered nearby, their loyalty a comforting presence. As the conversation ebbed and flowed, Savannah's gaze kept darting toward Zoe, a mixture of curiosity and something else I couldn't quite place. I knew I couldn't let this continue unaddressed. "Savannah," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "Can we talk?" She hesitated, glancing at Lorraine, who gave a barely perceptible nod. "Sure," Savannah replied, her tone cautious. We stepped outside, the crisp air a welcome relief from the stifling tension indoors. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "I know things have been difficult between us," I began, choosing my words carefully. "But I need you to understand how important Zoe is to me." Savannah's eyes narrowed slightly, her defenses rising. "I get it, Mari. She's your kid now." "It's more than that," I pressed, feeling the urgency of the moment. "I need you to respect her, to see her as part of this family." Savannah crossed her arms, a hint of defiance in her posture. "And what if I can't?" The challenge in her words was clear, and I felt a surge of frustration. But before I could respond, Zoe appeared at my side, her small hand slipping into mine. "Hi," Zoe said, her voice bright and unguarded. Savannah blinked, caught off guard by the directness. Hi." Zoe smiled, her innocence cutting through the tension. "Do you want to play?" The simplicity of her offer hung in the air, a reminder of what truly mattered. Savannah hesitated, her expression softening as she looked at Zoe. "Maybe later," Savannah said, her voice losing some of its edge. The moment was a small victory, a crack in the wall that had long divided us. But I knew it wasn't enough. There was more to be said, more to be resolved. "Savannah, I know you're scared," I said, taking a step closer. "But you don't have to be. We can find a way through this together." Her eyes met mine, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through the facade. I don't want to lose my place." "You won't," I promised, the conviction in my voice surprising even myself. "There's room for all of us if we choose to make it work." The words hung between us, a tentative bridge over the chasm that had divided our family for so long. It was then that Lorraine and Roger joined us, their expressions unreadable. "Mari," Lorraine began, her voice strained. "We need to talk about all this." I nodded, bracing myself for whatever was to come. "I'm listening." Roger stepped forward, his demeanor uncharacteristically reflective. "We've made mistakes," he admitted, the admission heavy with years of unspoken regret. "But we're willing to try if you are." The offer was unexpected, a lifeline extended in the midst of the storm. I felt a surge of hope, tempered by caution. This was the chance I had longed for, but it would take all of us to make it work. "I want Zoe to know her family," I said, my voice steady. "But it has to be a family that supports and respects her." Lorraine nodded, her eyes softening. "We can do that." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. A chance to rebuild what had been broken, to forge a new path forward. As we stood there, a tentative peace settling over us, I realized that the journey wasn't over. But with Zoe, Ethan, and my family by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next. The themes of revenge and justice had given way to something deeper, understanding and acceptance. And in that moment, I knew we were on the path to healing, one step at a time. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over Agnes's garden as I sat on the porch, watching Zoe play with Eliza and Tessa. Their laughter floated through the air, a melody of hope and renewal. It was a scene I had once thought impossible, a testament to the journey we had all taken. Ethan joined me, handing over a mug of tea. "Quite the family you've got here," he said, his voice warm with admiration. I nodded, feeling the weight of the past slowly lifting. "Yeah, it is," I replied, a smile tugging at my lips. The weeks following the family gathering had been transformative. Lorraine and Roger had made genuine efforts to reach out, their actions speaking louder than words. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and I was willing to meet them halfway. Savannah, too, had begun to change. Her initial resistance softened as she spent more time with Zoe, the innocence and openness of a child breaking down her defenses. It was a slow process, but I could see the glimmers of understanding and acceptance taking root. As the evening wore on, Agnes joined us, her presence a comforting constant. "You did good, Mari," she said, her eyes twinkling with pride. I took a deep breath, the reality of her words sinking in. "I couldn't have done it without you," I admitted, gratitude swelling in my chest. Agnes chuckled, a knowing smile on her lips. "You had it in you all along. You just needed to see it." Her words echoed in my mind, a reminder of the strength and resilience I had found within myself. The journey had been fraught with challenges, but it had also been one of growth and discovery. As the night settled in, Zoe came running over, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mommy, can we play a game?" I laughed, scooping her up into my arms. "Of course, sweetheart. What do you want to play?" She thought for a moment, her brow furrowing in concentration. "Hide and seek," then stood, ready to join in. "I'll count," he offered, winking at Zoe. As we scattered into the garden, I felt a sense of peace and contentment that I hadn't known in years. Conflicts and tensions that had once seemed insurmountable were now threads in the tapestry of our lives, woven into a story of redemption and renewal. Later, as the evening wound down and the stars began to twinkle overhead, Savannah approached me, a hesitant smile on her face. "Hey, Mari," she said, her voice tentative. I turned to her, sensing the weight of what she wanted to say. "Hey, Savannah." She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with newfound sincerity. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything." The apology was unexpected, a balm to old wounds. "Thank you," I replied, my voice soft but firm. "I appreciate it." Savannah nodded, a hint of relief in her expression. "I know it's going to take time, but I want to be better. For Zoe and for us." Her words were a promise, a commitment to change and growth. It was more than I had dared hope for, and I felt a swell of gratitude and hope. As the night deepened, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The themes of revenge and justice had transformed into something more profound: understanding, forgiveness, and the power of chosen family. Yet, as I lay in bed that night, a lingering question remained. Could we truly leave the past behind, or would its shadows continue to shape our future? It was a question without an easy answer, a reminder that life was a journey of constant evolution. But as I drifted off to sleep, Ethan's steady breathing beside me and Zoe's soft murmurs filling the room, I knew one thing for certain. We were on the right path, and together we could face whatever came next.
I remember when I first moved into that small, cozy house with Mark, my husband. It felt like a dream, surrounded by a little garden and just a stone's throw away from his parents, George and Helen. I thought it was perfect, having family so close, but I didn't know then what I know now. Our son, Tommy, was just a year old then, a bundle of joy and endless energy. Mark was different back then, or maybe I just saw what I wanted to see. His parents, well, they seemed like the sweet old couple next door. I learned pretty fast how wrong I was. It started with small things. George and Helen would always pop by, asking for favors, borrowing things they never returned. I didn't mind at first, happy to help, but their true colors showed when I needed them. One afternoon, I was knee-deep in laundry and house chores, and Tommy was being particularly fussy. I called Helen, hoping she could watch him for an hour. "Rachel, dear, I wish I could." Helen's voice had that fake sugary tone, but George and I are just so worn out. You know, with our age and all. I understood or tried to, but not long after, I saw them heading out, all spruced up for one of their shopping sprees. It stung, but what could I say? Mark wasn't any help either. One evening, I tried talking to him about it. "Mark, do you think your parents could help out a bit more with Tommy? They always say they're tired, but—" He cut me off, his voice sharp. "Rachel, they're old. They don't owe us babysitting. Besides, can't you manage? Why are you always so needy?" His words hit me like a slap. Was I being unreasonable? I couldn't even tell anymore. Then there was my mom, the sweetest woman who ran her own bakery. She had this knack for baking the most delicious buns and pastries. George and Helen found out about her bakery, and suddenly they were there all the time, smiling and chatting, sweet as honey. "Rachel, darling, your mother is a gem," Helen would gush, as they left with bags of free-baked goods. I remember telling my mom, "You don't have to give them so much for free, Mom." But she just smiled. "It's fine, dear. It's not that much." I wanted to believe that, to believe in the goodness of people. But something in me was starting to see the cracks in this picture. Perfect family setup. I just didn't know how deep those cracks went, not yet. A couple of years have passed. The rhythm of my life had become a relentless march of duties and unmet expectations. Every day was a repetition of the last. Wake up before dawn, prepare breakfast, get Tommy ready, clean, cook, and try to snatch moments of rest in between. It was like being stuck in a whirlpool, spinning endlessly. I remember one morning, the sunlight barely peeking through the curtains, and Tommy's cries piercing the quiet. I rushed to his room, still groggy, only to find him wide awake and playful. "Mommy, play!" he exclaimed with a toothy grin. As much as I adored him, I was exhausted. "Just a little while, honey," I managed to say, mustering a smile. The day unfolded in its usual chaos. Between laundry piles and Tommy's games, I tried to keep up. The phone rang amidst this whirlwind, its shrill tones slicing through the noise. It was Helen, her voice laced with expectation. "Rachel, dear, could you come over and help me with some cleaning? My back is acting up again." I glanced at the mess in my own house, feeling a twinge of irritation. "Helen, I'm swamped here. Maybe another time?" There was a pause, heavy with disappointment. "Oh, I see. Well, never mind then," she said in a tone that suggested I had deeply wronged her. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming. Was I being selfish? But as I hung up, I looked around at my own home, my own life, all needing attention. That evening, Mark came home, his face set in a frown. "Mom's upset. She needed help, and you just blew her off." I felt my defenses rise. "Mark, I'm not just sitting around. I have our home and Tommy to take care of." He snorted. "Doesn't look like you're doing a great job. This place is a mess, and what's for dinner anyway?" His words stung, and I fought back tears. "I'm doing my best, Mark. I really am." He just shook his head and walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling smaller than ever. The next day, I hoped for a reprieve, but it was not to be. George knocked on the door, his usual easygoing smile in place. "Rachel, I need a hand with fixing the shed. Lend me your toolbox." Despite the million things on my to-do list, I nodded and handed him the tools. "Sure, take what you need." As he walked away, I couldn't help but feel used. Was I nothing more than a resource to them? A convenience? The next morning, I woke up to Tommy's laughter and Mark's impatient grumbling. The day beckoned with its usual demands, but something in me had shifted. A tiny spark of rebellion, maybe, or just the stirrings of a long, dormant self. Reft. Whatever it was, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go on like this. As I made breakfast, I decided I would start taking small steps towards my own dreams again. It wouldn't be easy, but I had to try. For Tommy, for myself. The day that broke me started like any other, but by the time the sun set, my world had shifted irreversibly. I was in the middle of wrestling with a mountain of laundry when my phone buzzed. The screen flashed an unknown number. Hello? Rachel? This is Mercy Hospital. Your mother had a heart attack. She's stable now, but you should come quickly. My heart plummeted. Mom? My rock, in the hospital. I needed to get to her. But Tommy. I called Helen in a panic. Helen, it's Mom. She's in the hospital. I need to get there. Can you watch Tommy? Her response was cold, detached. Oh dear, that's bad. But we're just about to sit down for our TV show, and we're not really up for babysitting today. Unless, you could make it worth our while. Worth your while? Helen, this is an emergency. Well, $300 should cover it. We're missing our favorite show after all. I couldn't believe my ears. I hung up, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. How could they be so heartless? I dialed Mark next, hoping for some support, some understanding. Mark, Mom's in the hospital. I need to go. Your parents want $300 to watch Tommy. His reaction was like a slap in the face. Rachel, stop overreacting. It's just a heart attack, and Mom and Dad have a point. Their time is valuable. Valuable? My mother could be dying, and all you care about is a TV show and money? Look, I'm busy at work. Handle it, Rachel. And remember, my parents come first. His words echoed in my ears long after I hung up. I was alone in this, utterly alone. In a daze, I called my friend Lisa. Lisa, I need help. It's my mom. She didn't hesitate. I'll be right there. Go to your mom, Rachel. I've got Tommy. At the hospital, the stark white walls and the smell of antiseptic were overwhelming. I found my mom lying in a bed, pale but conscious. Mom, I whispered, taking her hand. Rachel, I'm okay, she murmured, though her voice was weak. The doctor pulled me aside. She's stable, but she'll need care and supervision once she's home. Home! The word echoed in my mind. What was home now? A place where my struggles were invisible, my pain unacknowledged? I returned home late, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I found Mark on the couch, indifferent. Your mom okay? He asked, not looking up from his phone. She needs care. I might have to stay with her. He shrugged. Do what you have to do. Just don't expect me to pick up your slack here. The days following Mom's heart attack were a blur of hospital visits and tough decisions. I spent every moment I could by her bedside, the fear of losing her a constant shadow. Amidst it all, the thought of going back to my old life with Mark and his parents felt impossible. One evening, as I sat beside Mom's hospital bed, her hand in mine, she whispered, Rachel, I'm sorry for all this trouble. Mom, don't be silly. You're not trouble. You're my mom. I'm staying with you, I said firmly, more to convince myself than her. She squeezed my hand, a silent thank you in her tired eyes. The next hurdle was telling Mark. I called him from the hospital parking lot, my heart pounding. Mark, I've made a decision. I'm moving in with Mom. She needs constant care. There was a pause, then a harsh laugh. You're kidding, right? What about your duties here? What about Tommy? Tommy's coming with me. And as for my duties, I think I've done more than enough. Mark's voice rose, sharp and accusing. You can't just abandon your family like this, Rachel. My family needs me, Mark. And right now, that's my mom and Tommy. His response was a string of angry words and accusations. But I held my ground. For the first time in a long time, I felt sure of my decision. Packing up my things, and Tommy's felt like shedding an old skin. Each item I placed in the suitcase was a step away from the life I had known, a life where I had felt invisible, unappreciated. Mark watched in silence, his anger simmering. As I zipped up the last bag, he finally exploded. So, that's it? You're choosing your mother over me? Over us? I looked him in the eye, my resolve stealing. I'm choosing to do what's right. You made your priorities clear. Now I'm making mine. The drive to Mom's was a mix of fear and relief. Fear of the unknown, of starting over. Relief at leaving behind a life that had become suffocating. Arriving at Mom's felt like coming home. A real home filled with love and care. I set up a small room for Tommy and started to settle into a routine of caring for Mom. Mom's health was improving, slowly but surely, and with each day, I felt a bit stronger, a bit more like the woman I used to be, the woman I wanted to be. Living with Mom and Tommy in her cozy, familiar house was like breathing fresh air after being underwater for too long. Each morning, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside and Tommy's giggles as he played with his grandma. But it wasn't all sunshine. The reality of my new life, especially the divorce, weighed heavily on me. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some old papers, Mom looked at me, concern etched on her face. Rachel, are you sure about the divorce? It's a big step. I nodded, feeling a mix of sadness and resolve. I know, Mom. But staying with Mark, it was suffocating me. I need to find myself again. She reached out and squeezed my hand. I'm here for you, honey. Always. The divorce proceedings were tough. Mark was bitter, throwing accusations and trying to make things difficult. But I stood my ground. I wanted freedom, not just for me, but for Tommy too. One day, I received a call from my lawyer. Rachel, Mark is demanding full custody of Tommy, claiming you're an unfit mother. My heart raced with anger and fear. Unfit? Because I chose to care for my sick mother? It's just a tactic, Rachel. Stay strong. The legal battles dragged on, but eventually, the divorce was finalized. I was granted full custody of Tommy, a relief that brought tears to my eyes. But with that relief came the daunting reality of single motherhood and the financial struggles ahead. I started helping Mom in the bakery, learning the ropes of the business. It was hard work, but fulfilling. The smell of fresh bread and pastries, the smiles on customers' faces. It was a world away from the life I had left behind. One evening, as we were closing up, Mom said, Rachel, you have a real talent for this. Maybe you should think about expanding the business, make it your own. The idea was both exciting and terrifying. Could I really do it? Was I capable of running a business? The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. I took a few online business courses, revamped the bakery's menu, and even started a small online presence. The bakery began to attract more customers, and our little venture started to bloom. Amidst all this, Tommy was thriving. He loved the bakery, often helping out with small tasks and charming the customers with his bright smile. One quiet evening, as I tucked Tommy into bed, he looked up at me with his big, innocent eyes. Mommy, I like it here. Grandma's house is fun. I kissed his forehead, feeling a surge of love and protectiveness. "I'm glad, baby. Mommy likes it here too." Lying in bed that night, I reflected on the journey I had embarked upon. It was a new beginning, and I was ready to see where it would take us. Life at Mom's with Tommy was settling into a comfortable rhythm. The bakery was doing well, and Mom's health was steadily improving. But just when I thought I had left the past behind, it came crashing back in the most unexpected way. One evening, while I was going through the bakery's accounts, my phone rang. The screen flashed Mark's name, a name I hadn't seen in months. My heart skipped a beat. "Hello?" "Rachel, you need to come over. It's urgent." Mark's voice was frantic, a tone I hadn't heard from him before. "What happened? Is it Tommy?" Panic gripped me. "No, it's my mother. She's fallen and broken her leg. Dad can't lift her, and I can't handle this alone." I paused, memories of their indifference flooding back. "Mark, why are you calling me? We're divorced. Your parents aren't my responsibility anymore." He was almost shouting now. "You're the only one nearby who can help. Just come over, please." The desperation in his voice was hard to ignore, but the wounds were still fresh. "Mark, I can't. I have my own life now. You need to figure this out." He cursed under the breath. "So that's it. You're just going to leave us in this mess." "Mark, remember when my mom was in the hospital? Where were you and your parents then?" The line went silent for a moment. Then he hung up. I sat there, phone in hand, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Guilt, anger, relief. It was a harsh reminder of the life I had walked away from. The next day, Lisa came by the bakery. "Heard about Mark's mom. You okay?" I nodded, pouring us both a cup of coffee. "Yeah, I'm fine. It just brought back a lot of memories." Lisa sipped her coffee, her eyes full of understanding. "You did the right thing, Rachel. You can't keep bailing them out." I knew she was right, but it didn't stop the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Had I become as cold and uncaring as they were? Weeks passed, and life went on. I heard through the grapevine that Mark's parents were struggling with caregivers, but I kept my distance. I had my own life to live, my own battles to fight. One night, as I tucked Tommy into bed, he asked, "Mommy, why don't we see Daddy anymore?" The question caught me off guard. Daddy and Mommy are living different lives now, but he still loves you, and so do I very much. "Okay, Mommy," he said, snuggling into his pillow. Several weeks had passed since that unexpected call from Mark. Life in the bakery with Mom and Tommy had become my new normal, a rhythm of early mornings and the comforting routine of baking. One morning, while arranging the pastries in the display, Mom mentioned casually, "I heard from Mrs. Green that Mark's been having a hard time with his parents. Seems like the nurses they hired don't stay long." I paused, a twinge of something, pity, maybe, flickering inside me. "Really? That's tough." Mom nodded. "Yes, apparently his mother's temper and his father's complaints are too much to handle." I sighed and continued with my work. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a bit sorry for Mark. But that part of my life was behind me now. The bakery had become my sanctuary, a place where I could pour my energy and creativity. The customers loved the new recipes I introduced, and their smiles were my daily reward. As I mixed dough for a batch of bread, Tommy came bouncing in fresh from school. "Mommy, guess what? I got a star on my math test?" I swept him up in a hug, his laughter filling the room. "That's amazing, Tommy! I'm so proud of you!" Mom watched us, her eyes shining with happiness. "You two are my everything," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Later that evening, after closing up the bakery, I sat with Mom, sipping tea. Mom, this bakery, it's been a blessing. I don't think I could have made it without this place. Without you. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Rachel, you're stronger than you think. You've made a new life for yourself and Tommy. That's something to be proud of. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about my journey, the pain, the struggle, and the triumphs. I had come out on the other side, stronger and more self-assured. My life had taken a turn I never expected, but I had found happiness in places I never thought to look. I thought about Mark and his parents briefly, hoping they would find their way through their challenges. But my focus was here, with my son and my mother, in the life I had rebuilt from the ground up. Life moves on, and so had I. I had found joy in the simple things, the smell of fresh bread, Tommy's laughter, Mom's stories. I had learned to cherish these moments, knowing they were the real essence of life. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace. I had risen from the ashes of my old life, and I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. It was a crisp morning at the bakery, the air filled with the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon. I was arranging the pastries when Mark's parents walked in, as if they were regular customers. The sight of them took me aback. Rachel, dear, could we have a few of those delicious buns? On the house? Of course, Helen said with her usual presumptuous air. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'm sorry, Helen George, but I can't give away pastries for free. You'll have to pay like everyone else. Their expressions soured. Well, aren't you greedy now? No wonder our son divorced you, George sneered, and they left without another word, not even asking about Tommy. As they walked out, a wave of emotions washed over me, but I stood firm. It was a stark reminder of why I had made the choices I had. I was done being taken for granted, done being the doormat, done being the doormat. Later, as I was teaching Tommy how to knead dough, he looked up at me with his big, curious eyes. Mommy, why were Grandma and Grandpa here? Why were they mean? I hugged him close, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes, people don't understand that it's not nice to take advantage of others, but it's okay. We're doing just fine without them. He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and turned his attention back to the dough. That evening, after closing up the bakery, I sat with Mom over a cup of tea. Mom, Mark's parents came in today. They haven't changed. Mom sighed, taking a sip of her tea. Some people never do, dear. But you've grown so much. You're not the same person who would let them walk all over you. She was right. The journey I had embarked upon had changed me. I was stronger, more confident, and I had learned the hard lesson of standing up for myself. Reflecting on the past months, I realized how far I had come. From the ashes of a broken marriage and a life filled with doubt, I had risen. I had built a new life for myself and Tommy, a life filled with love, respect, and dignity.
My name is Emma, and this is my story, a story of dreams, struggles, and the harsh realities of life. I'm 32, working as a manager in a reputable company. 6 years ago, I married David, an engineer in a local factory. We were young, in love, and hopeful about our future together. I remember sitting in our cozy living room one evening, the fading light of the day casting soft shadows around us. David was fiddling with his phone, a habit that seemed to consume him more each day. David, can we talk about something important? I asked, turning off the TV to catch his attention. He looked up, a bit distracted. Sure, Em, what's up? I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. You know, we've been trying for a baby for so long. I've been saving money from my salary and the rent from the apartment I inherited from Dad. We have a good amount now for our future child's upbringing and education. David nodded, his expression unreadable. Yeah, I know. You've been great with the savings and all. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was David's parents, Joan and Mike, coming in with their usual air of expectancy. They lived in a small house and often hinted about wanting something bigger. Emma, dear, we've been thinking, Joan started, settling herself on the couch. It's about time we looked for a bigger house, you know, something more comfortable. I exchanged a quick glance with David. Joan, we've talked about this. David and I are saving for our future child. We can't really afford to help with a house right now. Mike chimed in, his tone a bit harsh. But you guys have been trying for a child for years. Who knows if that will ever happen? I felt a sting in my heart at his words. David stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. Mike, that's not fair, I said firmly. We're still hopeful. And we need to plan for that future. The evening ended with an awkward goodbye. As they left, I turned to David, looking for some support. But he just shrugged, avoiding my gaze. It's complicated, Em. They're my parents, after all. I nodded, feeling a growing distance between us. But we have our own family to think about, David. Our future. The days leading up to the big reveal were filled with a mix of anticipation and nervousness for me. I had always dreamed of the moment I'd tell David we were going to be parents. After years of trying, the positive result on the pregnancy test felt like a miracle. That evening, as I waited for David to come home, I practiced how I would break the news. Would I just blurt it out, or make it a grand reveal? The possibilities played out in my mind, each ending with David sweeping me up in a hug, overjoyed at our impending parenthood. But life, as I was about to learn, doesn't always follow the script you write in your head. David arrived home later than usual, his footsteps heavy, his shoulders slumped. The lines on his face seemed deeper, like he was carrying the weight of the world. David, you're home. I said, my voice quivering with excitement. I have some incredible news. He barely looked up as he dropped his bag by the door. What's up, Em? His voice was tired, devoid of the usual warmth I was accustomed to. Taking a deep breath, I held up the pregnancy test. I'm pregnant, David. We're going to have a baby. I expected joy, surprise, maybe even tears. What I didn't expect was the look of sheer panic that crossed his face. Pregnant, he muttered, more to himself than to me. Now? This is really bad timing. My heart sank. Bad timing? David, we've wanted this for years. Why would it be bad timing? He sank into the couch, covering his face with his hands. After a long pause, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and resignation. I've done something. The money we saved, the money for our future child. I gave it to my parents. For a new house. And I took out a loan to cover the rest. His words hit me like a physical blow. You did what? Our savings? How could you do that without talking to me? I thought we weren't going to have a child, Emma. I wanted to do something for my parents, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. But what about us? Our dreams? Our plans? I felt a mix of anger and disbelief churning inside me. David stood up, pacing the room in agitation. I don't know, Em. I just didn't think it would happen. We can't afford a child now, not with the loan and everything. Tears blurred my vision. This was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of our life, and instead, it was unraveling at the seams. So, what are you saying? That we can't have this baby? My voice broke with the weight of my emotions. I don't know, Emma. I just don't know, he said, his voice hollow. That night, as I lay in bed, the reality of my situation slowly sank in. The joy of my pregnancy was overshadowed by David's betrayal. Our savings, the foundation of our future, was gone. The man I had shared my dreams with had made a choice that shattered them in an instant. As I lay there, feeling the first faint stirrings of life inside me, I realized my journey ahead was filled with uncertainty and fear. The tension in the house had been thick enough to cut with a knife ever since David confessed about the money. Each day that passed was a silent echo of the chaos brimming inside me. I was pregnant, isolated, and betrayed by David, the man I once saw as my partner in everything. One evening, I couldn't take the silence and the distance anymore. I needed answers, clarity, something to make sense of the mess we were in. David was lounging on the couch, lost in some TV show, a temporary escape from our reality. "David, we need to talk." "Now," I said, my voice trembling with a cocktail of anger and fear. He barely looked at me, a sigh escaping him. "What now, Emma? This whole situation. It's unbearable. I'm carrying our child, David. Our future. And all you do is avoid me." I was almost shouting, the pent-up frustration pouring out. David turned off the TV, his face set in a hard line. "What do you want me to say, Emma? That everything's going to be okay? Because it won't. We're in deep trouble here. And whose fault is that? You gave away our future for what? To please your parents?" The words were bitter, each one tasting of betrayal. He stood up abruptly, his voice rising. "Maybe having this baby isn't the best idea right now, Emma. Have you thought about that?" I felt like I'd been punched. Are you telling me to get an abortion?" He avoided my gaze, shifting uncomfortably. "My parents think it might be for the best. And I think they might be right." I was aghast, tears welling up in my eyes. "Your parents? You're taking their advice over what we want. Over what I want." David ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. "I don't know, Emma. We can't afford a baby. We're drowning here. That's no excuse to end a life, David. Our baby's life." My voice broke, the reality of his words sinking in. He turned away, his voice cold and detached. "If you're so set on having this baby, then maybe you can't stay here." That hit me like a ton of bricks. "You're kicking me out? Your pregnant wife?" "I don't know, Emma. I just can't deal with this." He was almost yelling now, something I'd never seen him do. That night, I packed my bags through a veil of tears. My home, my marriage, my dreams, all were crumbling around me. I moved into my small apartment on the city outskirts, the one place that was truly mine. But in the midst of the turmoil, a fierce determination took root. I was going to have this baby, with or without David. I was scared, yes, but more than that, I was resolute. This baby was a part of me, and I would do whatever it took to give it a life. The first few weeks in my old apartment were like living in a daze. The walls, once familiar, now echoed with the loneliness of my new reality. I was pregnant, alone, and the future seemed like a dark, uncharted territory. I spent most days in a routine that was both a comfort and a reminder of my solitude. The small joys of pregnancy, which I had once imagined sharing with David, were now moments I experienced in solitude. One afternoon, my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, knocked on my door. She was an elderly lady, always with a kind word and a keen interest in the lives of those around her. "Emma, dear, I haven't seen you in ages. How are you holding up?" Her voice was laced with genuine concern. I forced a smile, not wanting to burden her with my troubles. "I'm okay, Mrs. Jenkins. Just taking each day as it comes." She peered at me closely, her eyes sharp despite her age. "You know, you can talk to me. I've seen a thing or two in my time." I sighed, the weight of my situation suddenly feeling too heavy to bear alone. It's just hard, you know? David and we're not together anymore. And this baby. My voice trailed off, choked by emotion. Mrs. Jenkins reached out, her hand warm on mine. Life throws us curveballs, dear. But remember, you're stronger than you think. This little one, she patted my belly gently, is lucky to have a mom like you. Her words, simple and sincere, were a balm to my weary soul. In that moment, I felt a flicker of strength reignite within me. As the days turned into weeks, I started to adjust to my new life. I realized that I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for the little life growing inside me. I began to read books on pregnancy and parenting, immersing myself in learning everything I could about being a good mother. One evening, as I sat flipping through a baby care book, my phone rang. It was a call from my old friend Lisa, whom I hadn't spoken to in months. Emma. I heard about what happened. Are you okay? Lisa's voice was filled with worry. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. I'm managing, Lisa. It's not easy, but I'm getting through it. Listen, if you need anything at all, just let me know. I'm here for you, she said earnestly. Her offer of support was a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in this. There were people who cared, who were willing to stand by me. Thanks, Lisa. That means a lot, I replied, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over me. As I hung up the phone, I realized that even in the darkest of times, there were glimmers of hope and kindness. I might have been on my own, but I wasn't entirely alone. With each passing day, I grew more resilient, more determined to face whatever lay ahead. The stillness of my apartment was broken by the piercing ring of the phone. David's name flashed on the screen, a name I hadn't seen in months. With a mixture of apprehension and annoyance, I answered. Emma, it's David, his voice sounded oddly nonchalant. The housewarming for my parents is coming up. They're all settled in the new place. His casual tone set me on edge. Why would I care about that, David? Well, I thought you'd sorted things out, you know, with the pregnancy, he said, implying I had an abortion. His assumption boiled my blood, but I held my tongue, letting him believe his narrative. So, what do you want? I was thinking you could come. Show some goodwill, maybe bring a gift. It's the least you could do, after the mess, he added, as if it was a simple request. His audacity was astounding. But a part of me knew this was a chance to face this head-on, to put an end to this chapter. Fine, I'll be there, I said, a plan forming in my mind. On the day of the housewarming, I stood outside their opulent new house, my 8-month pregnant belly prominent. Taking a deep breath, I walked in. David was by the door, and his face went pale as he saw my belly. You are. I thought you. You thought wrong, I cut him off sharply, my voice edged with steel. The house was filled with their friends and family. As I moved through the crowd, whispers followed me like shadows. Joan, David's mother, approached with a look of utter shock. Emma, you're still. But we assumed. That I'd get rid of my baby? No, Joan. I kept my child, I said firmly, meeting her gaze. David, recovering from his shock, came to us. Emma, this isn't the time or the place. It's the perfect time and place, David. Everyone should know. I didn't get an abortion. I'm still pregnant, I raised my voice, making sure it carried across the room. The room fell into a stunned silence. Guests stared, some with open mouths, others with veiled curiosity. David and his parents looked as if the ground had fallen away beneath them. But I didn't leave. I stood there, amidst the shock and whispers, my presence an unspoken challenge. As the evening wore on, I held my ground. Conversations resumed around me, but the air was thick with tension. David and his parents tried to avoid me, but there was no escaping the truth I represented in their midst. When David's boss, a man I knew only in passing, approached with a puzzled look, I didn't back down. "Emma, I didn't expect to see you here, especially like this." "Like what?" "Pregnant and alone because David couldn't handle it?" I retorted, my words sharp but true. David hurried over, his face a mask of embarrassment. "Emma, please, let's not do this here." "Why not, David?" "Your family, your friends, they should know the kind of man you are." "The kind of family you come from," I said, my voice laced with bitterness. The party continued around us, but the facade had crumbled. I stayed, making my point with my mere presence. I was a living testament to their false assumptions and broken promises. As the evening drew to a close, I left the house, my head held high. I had faced them all, spoken my truth, and stood my ground. It was a declaration of my strength, my refusal to be silenced or shamed. The days following the housewarming party were a whirlwind of emotions. I had made my stand, revealed my truth in the most public way I could have imagined. The fallout was immediate and intense. I was at my apartment, still processing the events of that night, when my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Lisa, a close friend and one of the few people I still kept in touch with. "Hey, Emma. Just heard about the party. Are you okay?" her message read. I sighed, typing out a response. "Yeah, I'm fine." It was tough, but I had to do it. My phone rang almost immediately, Lisa's name flashing on the screen. "Emma, you can't just drop a bomb like that and say you're fine. Tell me everything." Her concern was touching, and in that moment, I needed to talk to someone who genuinely cared. It was a mess, Lisa. I showed up, and David and his parents were shocked. They thought I'd had an abortion. "Wow, that's intense. But I'm proud of you for standing up to them," she said, her voice filled with admiration. The conversation with Lisa was a much-needed relief, but it couldn't erase the reality of my situation. David's parents, and David himself, had been under the impression that I would just quietly fade away, that I wouldn't dare disrupt their perfect little celebration with the truth of their son's actions. A few days later, I received a call from someone unexpected, David's boss, Mr. Henderson. He had always been cordial to me at company events, but we were hardly acquaintances. "Emma, this is Frank Henderson. I was at the party, and I was surprised by what I heard," he said, his voice uneasy. "I'm sure you were." "I'm sure a lot of people were," I replied, my tone guarded. "I just wanted to say, if there's anything you need, any help at work or anything, just let me know." I had no idea about what David had done, he offered. His offer was unexpected, and it gave me a slight pause. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I appreciate that." The call ended on a polite note, but it left me thinking. David's actions, and the subsequent reveal at the party, had wider implications than I had anticipated. People were talking, taking sides, and in the middle of it all was me, still trying to navigate my way through this chaos. The decision to file for divorce was not just a choice, it was a necessity. I couldn't let David and his actions go unpunished. The emotional turmoil he put me through, especially with his demands for an abortion, was unforgivable. I was ready to fight for my rights, for my unborn child's future, and for what was morally just. Sitting across from my lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, I explained my decision. "I want to file for divorce. I need alimony for our child, and I want a majority of his assets." He also pushed me for an abortion. "That's emotional abuse, and I won't let it slide." Mr. Jenkins, a no-nonsense man with a keen legal mind, nodded. "Do you have any proof of these demands for an abortion, Emma?" I pulled out my phone, where I had saved the recording of that fateful conversation with David. I recorded it. He didn't know, but I did. It was the only way I knew how to protect myself. Mr. Jenkins listened to the recording, his expression hardening. "This is good, Emma. This will be key in court." The day of the court hearing was a storm of emotions. I sat there, heavily pregnant, facing the man I once loved, now my adversary. David looked confident, perhaps believing that the system would favor him. When it was my turn to present my case, Mr. Jenkins played the recording. David's voice filled the room, cold and clear, demanding an abortion. You could feel the shock in the courtroom. David's face turned red with anger. You recorded me? That's low, Emma. You won't prove anything with that. I looked him straight in the eyes, my voice steady but filled with emotion. I recorded it because I knew this day would come. Because I knew no one would believe me otherwise. You wanted me to get rid of our baby, David. The court needs to know the truth. His lawyer tried to object, to discredit the recording, but the damage was done. The judge listened intently, his expression growing graver by the minute. After both sides presented their cases, the judge delivered his verdict. The court rules in favor of Ms. Emma. The evidence of emotional abuse is clear and compelling. Mr. David is ordered to pay alimony and a majority of his assets as compensation. David stood there, stunned, as the judge announced the verdict. He turned to me, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. You've ruined me, Emma. I hope you're happy. I looked back at him, feeling a surge of vindication. This isn't about revenge, David. It's about justice. For me, and for our child. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a burden lift off my shoulders. It had been a tough battle, but I had won. More importantly, I had stood up for myself and my child. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Sitting in the small, cozy nursery I had prepared in my apartment, I cradled my newborn son, Aiden, in my arms. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine, a symbol of a new bond, a new life. The struggles of the past months seemed to melt away in his innocent gaze. My friend Lisa came by to visit, her face beaming as she saw Aiden. He's gorgeous, Emma. You did it. You're a mom now. I smiled, feeling a mix of exhaustion and elation. Yeah, I am. It's still sinking in. Lisa sat beside me, her eyes softening as she looked at Aiden. How are you holding up? After everything? I sighed, looking down at my son. It's been tough, Lisa. But looking at him, I know it was all worth it. He's my little miracle. As we chatted, the topic of David inevitably came up. Have you heard from him since the court ruling? Lisa asked, a hint of concern in her voice. I shook my head. No, and I don't expect to. He's paying the alimony, that's all that matters now. Aiden and we're moving on. The conversation drifted to plans for the future. I talked about my hopes for Aiden, for us. Despite the hardships, I felt a sense of optimism, a belief that we could make it. A few days later, I took Aiden for a walk in the park. The fresh air and the sound of children playing around us felt like a balm to my soul. As I pushed the stroller, an elderly woman stopped me. He's a beautiful baby, dear, she said, smiling warmly at Aiden. Thank you, I replied, feeling a surge of pride. Treasure these moments, they grow up so fast, she advised, her eyes twinkling with wisdom. I nodded, knowing she was right. I will. Every single moment. Walking back home, I thought about the journey I had been on. The pain, the betrayal, the fight for justice, and now, the joy of motherhood. It hadn't been an easy path, but it had led me here, to a new beginning with my son.
My name's Grace. I'm just your regular woman, but life's thrown some curveballs my way. I guess I should start from the beginning. I met Jack in high school. He was the quiet guy in class, always keeping to himself. I was the one who made the first move. Hey Jack, got a minute? I remember asking him one day after class. That's how it all started. We were the typical high school sweethearts. Prom night, first kiss under the stars, all that stuff. His folks, Mr. and Mrs. Dawson, They loved me from day one. "Grace, you're just the kind of girl we hoped Jack would find," Mrs. Dawson used to say. I felt like part of their family. The only person who didn't seem too thrilled was my younger sister, Lily. She's 4 years younger than me, but we never really got along. I remember catching her staring at Jack with this, I don't know, this longing look in her eyes. But I shrugged it off. Sisters, right? Jack and I got married when we were both 23. I had just finished college and started working as an economist. Jack took a job as a security guard. It wasn't much, but we were happy, or so I thought. A year into our marriage, our twins, Alex and Ben, were born. Jack was over the moon at first. "We're a real family now, Grace," he said, holding them at the hospital. But that joy didn't last. He started coming home late, sometimes not at all. "Where have you been?" I'd ask, trying to keep my voice steady. "Out," he'd snap back, avoiding my gaze. It was like living with a stranger. Then came the fight that changed everything. Money was tight, and the twins wouldn't stop crying. "Can't you make them stop?" Jack yelled one night. "I'm doing my best, Jack. They're your kids, too," I fired back. He stormed out of the house that night. The next morning, Jack and all his stuff were gone, vanished. I called him over and over, no answer. In a panic, I called my parents. "Have you heard from Jack?" I asked, voice trembling. There was a pause on the line. "Grace, honey, Lily's gone too," my dad finally said. My heart sank. It couldn't be. But deep down, I knew. Betrayed by my husband and my sister. I leaned on my parents and Jack's folks during that time. They were all I had left. "We're here for you, Grace," Mr. Dawson assured me, his voice heavy with disappointment. I filed for divorce. No sign of Jack or Lily. I was alone, with 2 boys to raise and a broken heart. But I was determined to keep going, for my boys. Life without Jack was like walking through a never-ending storm. Me, with my twin boys, Alex and Ben, just trying to keep our heads above water. I remember one evening, the boys were crying nonstop. I was at my wits' end. That's when Mom called. "Grace, how are you holding up?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "Mom, it's tough. The boys won't sleep, and I'm exhausted," I admitted, feeling the tears coming. "Listen, honey, you're not alone in this. We're here for you, okay? Don't you forget that," Mom said firmly. That was Mom, always the rock in our family. Then there was Jack's dad, Mr. Dawson. He came over one day, just to check in. "Grace, I want you to know, we're just as upset with Jack as you are. You're still family to us," he said, sitting on our worn-out couch, looking around the small apartment I could barely afford. I just nodded, not trusting my voice. Mr. Dawson always had a way of making me feel like I wasn't a total failure. But the reality was, money was tight, real tight. I remember going through the bills, feeling like I was drowning. "How am I going to do this?" I whispered to myself. My dad came by one weekend to help out. He saw the stack of bills on the kitchen table. "Grace, you know we can help you out with this, right?" he said, his brow furrowed with worry. "I know, Dad. I want to do this on my own. I have to," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I settled into a routine. It was hard, no doubt about it. But every time I looked at Alex and Ben, with their big, innocent eyes, I knew I had to keep going. They were my world now, my everything. One day, after a particularly rough night, I dropped the boys off at my parents' place for a few hours. Just needed some time to breathe, you know? I sat in the park, watching other families, kids running around, laughing, parents watching over them, smiles on their faces. It hit me then, how much my life had changed, how much I had lost. But then I thought about what I still had, my boys, my family, a fighting spirit. I wiped away the tears, stood up, and walked back to my parents' house. I was Grace, single mom to 2 amazing boys, and I was going to make it, come hell or high water. Life was a roller coaster, and I was hanging on, trying not to fall off. Then one day, Mr. Dawson, Jack's dad, came over with an offer that could change everything. "Grace, I've been thinking," he started, looking a bit uncomfortable in our tiny living room. "I've got some savings, around 100,000. I want to give it to you, for the boys." I was speechless for a second. "Mr. Dawson, that's a lot of money. But I can't just take it," I replied, feeling overwhelmed. He waved a hand dismissively. "It's for my grandson's future, Grace. No strings attached." His generosity was touching, but an idea was forming in my mind. "Mr. Dawson, what if we use that money to start a business? Something that can give us all a steady income?" He raised an eyebrow. "What kind of business?" "A pastry shop," I said, the idea growing in my mind. "Your wife, Anne, she's an amazing baker. Remember those cakes she used to make for the church bake sales?" Mr. Dawson chuckled. "Yeah, she always had a knack for baking, but she's been out of that game for a long time." "Well, maybe it's time for her to get back in," I suggested, feeling a spark of excitement. The next step was talking to Mrs. Dawson, Anne. I went over to their house the following day. "Anne, I have a proposal for you," I said as we sat in her cozy kitchen. "How would you feel about starting a pastry shop? You bake, I'll handle the finances, and George can manage the front end." Anne looked surprised. "Me? A pastry chef again? Oh, I don't know, Grace. It's been ages." "You still got it, Anne. I know it," I encouraged her, hoping she'd see the potential. After a bit of convincing, Anne warmed up to the idea. "Well, it has always been a dream of mine," she admitted with a smile. We worked out the details over the next few weeks, found a little spot downtown that was perfect for the shop. We all put in the work, painting, decorating, getting everything ready. Opening day was a whirlwind. I stood behind the counter, watching as people poured in, drawn by the smell of fresh pastries and Anne's reputation. "Grace, we're doing it! We're actually doing it!" Anne said, her face flushed with excitement as she took a brief break from the kitchen. I smiled, feeling a sense of pride I hadn't felt in a long time. "We sure are, Anne. We sure are." It was more than just a business. It was a new beginning, a chance to build something of my own, and I was ready for it. The pastry shop, Sweet Beginnings, was more than just a new venture. It became our world. The early mornings, the endless baking, the constant hum of the oven, it was exhausting but exhilarating. Anne was in her element in the kitchen. "Grace, I need more sugar," she'd call out, her voice muffled by the mixer's whir. I'd dash to the storeroom, lugging back a heavy bag of sugar. "Here you go, Chef Anne," I'd tease, dropping the bag with a thud. George, Mr. Dawson, was the charm behind the counter. "You must try our apple pie, best in town," he'd boast to the customers, who lapped up every word. He had a knack for making everyone feel special. The shop was bustling from dawn till dusk. People came for the pastries, but stayed for the warmth. We became a fixture in the community. Regulars would drop by, not just for a bite, but for a chat. "Grace, how do you manage all this?" One of our regulars, Mrs. Jenkins, asked me one busy afternoon. "It's a lot, but I've got a great team," I replied, gesturing towards Anne and George, who were sharing a laugh over a batch of burnt cookies. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were days when the dough just wouldn't rise, or when a new recipe turned into a disaster. "Back to the drawing board," Anne would say, undeterred by the setback. One day, we faced our first big crisis. The oven broke down in the middle of a huge order. "What are we going to do?" Anne panicked, her hands covered in flour. I took a deep breath. "We'll figure it out, Anne. We always do." And we did. We borrowed the bakery's oven down the street and worked through the night. The order was delivered on time, and our reputation for reliability was cemented. As months passed, Sweet Beginnings grew in popularity. We had to hire extra help. I interviewed a bunch of local kids and hired two, a shy girl named Sarah and a lanky boy named Tom. They were green, but eager to learn. "Keep an eye on the cupcakes, Sarah. They burn easily," Anne instructed, showing her the ropes. Tom was put on cleaning duty initially, but he soon showed a keen interest in baking. "Can I try making the dough?" he asked one day, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Why not? Let's see what you've got, Tom," Anne replied, handing him the apron. My days were filled with numbers, orders, and managing the staff. I rarely got a moment to sit down. But when I did, I'd watch the life we had built. The customers enjoying their treats, the laughter from the kitchen, the sense of community. It was overwhelming at times. My parents were regular visitors. "You've turned this place around, Grace," my dad said one day, looking around proudly. "It's not just me, Dad. It's all of us," I replied, feeling a sense of team pride. As the first anniversary of Sweet Beginnings approached, we planned something special. A big sale, free samples, the works. The shop was packed, the line stretching out the door. "Can't believe it's been a year," George said, wiping his brow as he served another customer. "It feels like just yesterday we were painting these walls," Anne added, taking a rare break from the kitchen. That night, after the last customer had left and the shop was cleaned, we sat down, exhausted but happy. "To 1 year of sweet beginnings and many more to come," I toasted, raising my coffee cup. "To family," George added, his voice thick with emotion. "To dreams," Anne said, smiling. We clinked our cups, the sound echoing in the empty shop. I looked at Anne and George, not just as my in-laws, but as my partners, my supporters, my family. Life at the pastry shop was chugging along just fine. We opened several branches in neighboring towns. It was difficult, but we managed. Once again. Then one day, out of the blue, my past decided to make a comeback. I was checking the shop's social media when I saw a message request. It was from Lily, my sister. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from her since she ran off with Jack. "Living the dream with your ex, sis," read the message, followed by a photo of her and Jack lounging on some exotic beach. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. "Why now?" I muttered to myself. I tried to ignore it, but she kept sending more messages, each one a slap in the face. "Look at us, Grace. This could have been you, but you were too busy playing shopkeeper," another message taunted. I was boiling inside. During my break, I called Mom. "You won't believe who's messaged me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Lily?" Mom guessed, her tone weary. "What does she want now?" "Just rubbing her fancy life in my face," I replied, scrolling through Lily's messages filled with pictures of her and Jack. "Don't let her get to you, Grace. She's just trying to provoke you," Mom advised. I knew she was right, but it was hard to swallow. That evening, I talked to George about it. "Can you believe it? After all these years, she has the nerve to flaunt her life with Jack," I said, frustration evident in my voice. George shook his head. "Some people never change. Just ignore her, Grace." But ignoring her was easier said than done. Every new message from Lily was like a thorn pricking me. Pictures of fancy dinners, luxury hotels, endless bragging. It was too much. One day, I finally snapped. "What do you want, Lily? Why are you doing this?" I typed back, my fingers trembling with anger. Her reply was quick. "Just showing you what you're missing out on. It's not too late to join the fun side of life, Grace." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Join her? After everything she had done? "No thanks, I've got everything I need right here," I typed back, trying to sound more confident than I felt. She sent a laughing emoji in response. "Suit yourself. Enjoy your little bakery." I blocked her. It felt like the only way to stop her poison from seeping into my life. But even after blocking her, her words lingered in my mind. I looked around the shop, at the customers enjoying our pastries, at my team working hard, at the life I had built. Lily could keep her so-called glamorous life. I had something real, something I was proud of. But her messages left a sour taste in my mouth. It was a reminder that no matter how far you go, the past has a way of catching up with you. I just hoped it wouldn't catch up any further. The sting of betrayal from Lily's messages lingered in my mind. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. That's when George, my father-in-law, proposed a plan that seemed almost too daring. As we sat in the back of the pastry shop, I spilled the beans about Lily's messages. George listened, his face a mix of concern and anger. "Grace, we can't let them get away with this," he said, his voice firm. "We need to teach them a lesson." I was intrigued but cautious. "What do you have in mind?" George's eyes twinkled with mischief. "A fake will. We make them think they stand to inherit something substantial." It was a bold plan, but part of me was eager for some sort of retribution. "You think it will work?" I asked. "I'm sure of it. Greed can make people do foolish things," he replied confidently. I took a deep breath and sent Lily a carefully worded message. "Heard about George's new will. Looks like you and Jack might be in for a surprise." Lily's response was swift and predictable. "What kind of surprise? Tell me more." I played along, giving away just enough to keep her interested. "Can't say much. You should come back if you don't want to miss out." Then came the call from Jack. His voice, once so familiar, now sounded distant and cold. "Grace, what's this about a will?" he asked bluntly. Hearing him after all these years, I felt a surge of emotions, but I kept my composure. "You heard right. George is considering his options," I said nonchalantly. Jack's interest was piqued. "And what about us? What are we getting?" The blunt greed in his voice was jarring. Not a single word about our sons, his own children. It was all about what he could gain. "You'll have to come back and see," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "We'll be there," he said, before abruptly ending the call. I hung up, my heart racing. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back. I filled George in on the conversation. "They took the bait," I said, a mix of satisfaction and nervousness in my voice. George nodded, a look of determination on his face. Let's see how far they're willing to go for greed. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake off the anxiety. What if the plan backfired? What if it made things worse? George, however, remained calm and collected. "Trust the plan, Grace. We're in control," he reassured me. As the day of their return approached, the shop buzzed with rumors. Our staff, unaware of the real reason behind Lily and Jack's return, speculated wildly. "Maybe they're coming back for good," Sarah, one of our employees, suggested. Tom, another employee, chimed in. "Or maybe they're here to cause more trouble." I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to the impending confrontation. Lily was back in town, flaunting her lavish lifestyle right in my face. "Look at all I've bought, Grace. Life's been good to us," she gloated, waving her designer bag. I tried to keep my composure. "Glad to hear it, Lily." She smirked. "Well, of course, you wouldn't understand. You're just a simple accountant." Her words stung. She didn't know the whole truth, but I bit back my response. "I'm happy with my life, Lily. That's enough for me." She scoffed. "You were always so boring, Grace. No wonder Jack left you for me." Before I could reply, George, Jack's father, stepped in. "That's enough, Lily. Let's talk about why you're really here." Jack, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Yeah, about the will. We're entitled to our share, right?" George looked at them both, a stern expression on his face. "Actually, there's something you should know about the confectionery business." Lily and Jack leaned in, eager. "The confectionery and its branches in other cities, they don't belong to me," George began, his voice steady. Their eyes widened in confusion. "They belong to Grace," he continued. "She's the true owner. I was just listed as the leader." Lily's face turned from smug to shocked. Jack's mouth hung open, unable to process the revelation. You're rich?" Jack stammered, his eyes darting between me and George. I nodded, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. "Yes, I am." Lily was speechless, her earlier arrogance evaporated. "And there's more," George added. "I've decided to leave all my property to my grandchildren, Grace's boys." And then Lily screamed, "What? You can't do this to us. We need money to pay off these damn debts." "Lily, shut up," Jack tried to tell her. I laughed. "Don't worry, Jack, I know everything. All your ostentatious luxury is nothing but loans, loans, and more loans." The final blow landed. Lily and Jack looked utterly defeated, their dreams of a windfall crumbling to dust. I looked at them, feeling a mix of triumph and pity. They had come back for money, only to find that their greed had led them to nothing. After Lily and Jack left the shop, their faces a picture of shock and defeat, I couldn't help but feel a mix of triumph and relief. George patted my back. "You handled that well, Grace." "I just wish it didn't have to come to this," I sighed, staring at the door they had just walked out of. "Well, Sometimes life throws you lemons, and you made the best lemonade out of it, George said with a chuckle. Just then, Sarah, one of our employees, came up to us. Is everything okay, Grace? We heard some commotion. I smiled at her. Everything's fine, Sarah. Just some old business finally getting settled. She nodded, still looking a bit concerned, but went back to her work. The rest of the day went by in a blur. I was busy with the shop, but my mind kept going back to the encounter with Lily and Jack. It was over, finally. That evening, as I was closing up, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lily. You haven't seen the last of us, it read. I stared at the screen, feeling a surge of anger. But then, I took a deep breath and typed back, Move on, Lily, I have. I blocked her number, feeling a sense of finality. It was time to let go of the past and focus on the future. As I walked home, I thought about my journey. From the heartbreak and betrayal to building a successful business and standing up for myself. It hadn't been easy, but I had come out stronger. I reached home to find my boys, Alex and Ben, playing in the living room. They ran up to me, their faces beaming. Mommy, you're home! I hugged them tightly, feeling an overwhelming sense of love and protection for them. Yes, and I'm not going anywhere, I whispered. That night, as I tucked them into bed, I realized that this was my true wealth. My children, my family, my resilience. I went to bed that night with a smile on my face. I had faced my biggest fears and emerged victorious. I was no longer just Grace, the betrayed wife, or Grace, the simple accountant. I was Grace, the fighter, the survivor, the winner. And this was just the beginning. My name's Rose Bennett, just another face in the crowd, or so it seems. At 28, I've carved out a niche for myself as a librarian in a quaint part of town. My days are typically filled with the rustle of pages, the quiet hum of people lost in stories, and the occasional chatter about books and authors. It's a peaceful, unremarkable existence that I cherish deeply. But there's a twist to my story that's known to only a few. I am, in fact, the daughter of Charles Harrington. Yes, the renowned magnate behind the colossal Harrington Enterprises. Despite this, I've always shied away from the glare of the media and the high society that comes with such a name. I chose my grandmother's surname, Bennett, a deliberate move to disconnect myself from the Harrington legacy and carve out my own path. Dad was surprisingly supportive, understanding my need for normalcy in a life that could easily have been anything but. Outside the library, I have a hidden passion that contrasts starkly with my quiet professional life poker. Not just any casual game, but the high-stakes world of national and international tournaments. I'm not one to brag, but let's just say I've managed to collect quite a few trophies and accolades over the years. In the poker circles, I'm known for my skill and strategy, a reputation I've built independently of my father's influence. It was at one of these high-profile tournaments that I crossed paths with Mark Dawson. He stood out not just for his skill at the poker table, but also for his easygoing demeanor and quick wit. Mark had a knack for reading the game and the people around him, a talent that made him a tough opponent and an intriguing character. Our connection was instant and undeniable. We found ourselves talking for hours, not just about poker, but about everything under the sun, our favorite books, the best local eateries, our dreams and aspirations. It wasn't long before these conversations turned into dates. Our outings were simple and unpretentious, no lavish dinners or extravagant gifts. Just two people genuinely enjoying each other's company, often over a meal in some cozy diner. I remember one evening, as we walked to his car after a dinner at our favorite burger joint, Mark said with a chuckle, "You know, Rose, I could take you to some upscale restaurant, but I'd have to pawn my watch for that." I laughed and replied, "And risk you checking the time every 2 minutes? No thanks. I'd rather have these easy moments than a night of pretense." That was the essence of our relationship, straightforward, genuine, with no need for frills or facades. It was a refreshing change from the world I was born into, a world where appearances often mattered more than reality. Little did I know that our simple, happy bubble was about to face its first real test. However, in the back of my mind, there was always a niggling thought: how would our relationship evolve in the context of our true identities? As our relationship grew, so did our trust and comfort with each other. It was a typical evening. We were lounging on my small apartment's couch, enjoying a quiet night in. The TV was playing some old sitcom, but our attention was more on each other than on the screen. Mark turned to me suddenly, a serious look in his eyes. "Rose, there's something I've been meaning to tell you," he said, turning off the TV. I sat up, feeling a knot in my stomach. "What's up? You're looking all serious. Did I forget to pay my half of the pizza again?" He chuckled, but his expression quickly sobered. "No, it's not about the pizza. It's about me, about who I am." I leaned in, curious. "Okay, spill it. You're not a secret agent or something, are you?" "No, nothing like that," he replied, taking a deep breath. "I haven't been completely honest with you about my financial situation. I'm actually... well, I'm quite wealthy." I blinked, taken aback. "Wealthy? Like buying a yacht for fun wealthy?" "Not exactly, but I made a significant amount of money through some savvy tech investments. I didn't tell you because I wanted to be sure you liked me for me, not my bank account." I laughed, the tension easing. "Mark, I've been dating you for months, and the most extravagant thing we've done is order extra cheese on our pizza. I think you're safe." He smiled, relieved. "I guess you're right. It's just been bugging me, keeping this from you." I took his hand, smiling. "Your secret's safe with me, but since we're on the topic of secrets, I have one too." Mark raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh? Do tell." I took a deep breath, mirroring his earlier seriousness. "I'm not just a librarian. I'm actually the daughter of Charles Harrington. Yes, that Harrington." Mark's eyes widened. "The billionaire businessman? That's your dad?" I nodded. "Yep, but I've kept it under wraps. Took my grandma's surname and everything. I wanted a normal life, away from all that chaos." There was a moment of silence before Mark burst into laughter. "So, we're both undercover millionaires pretending to live the simple life?" I joined in the laughter, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "Seems like it. We're quite the pair, aren't we?" He grinned, pulling me into a hug. "The best pair. I guess this means we can upgrade from extra cheese to gourmet toppings now." I playfully punched his arm. "Don't push your luck. I might be a millionaire's daughter, but I still love my simple pleasures." After months of dating, the inevitable happened. Mark suggested I meet his parents. I wasn't particularly nervous at first. After all, I'd managed to handle my own family dramas pretty well. But then Mark dropped a bit of a bombshell. "So, Rose, there's something you should know about my folks," he said one evening as we were planning our visit. I looked up from my phone, curious. "Oh? What's up? Do they have a secret dungeon or something?" Mark didn't smile at my joke. "No, nothing like that. It's just, they're a bit old-fashioned. They have this thing against modern women who they think are just after money." I raised an eyebrow. "And you think I'll come off as a gold digger?" "No, of course not." Mark rushed to clarify. "It's just, they can be judgmental. I just want you to be prepared." I nodded, suddenly feeling a bit apprehensive. "Well, that's going to be fun. Don't worry, I'll handle it." The day arrived, and we drove to his parents' house. It was a nice place, not too big, not too small. Mark had mentioned he bought it for them. They greeted us at the door, his mom, Linda, and his dad, George. The air was cordial, but there was a stiffness to it. "Mom, Dad, this is Rose," Mark introduced me with a smile. "Nice to meet you," I said, extending a hand. Linda gave me a once-over and shook my hand lightly. "Welcome, Rose. Mark has told us a bit about you." Dinner was an experience. They served some exotic dishes I'd never seen before. Linda casually asked, "Rose, do you know how to eat this? It's a bit complicated." I hesitated, feeling my cheeks warm. No, not really, but I'm always up for learning new things." Mark shot me a supportive glance, but said nothing. The conversation at the table was strained. George asked about my job, and I could see the disappointment in their eyes when I mentioned I was a librarian. "A librarian, huh?" Linda remarked. "Must be a quiet job." "It is," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "But I love it. Books have always been a passion of mine." The evening dragged on with more small talk and awkward silences. When we finally left, I let out a sigh of relief. In the car, Mark apologized. "I'm really sorry about that, Rose. They can be tough to deal with." I shrugged, trying to brush it off. "It's fine. It's not like I was expecting a warm and fuzzy welcome." Mark looked guilty. "I just wish they'd give you a chance. You're amazing, and they're missing out on knowing that." I smiled at him, appreciative of his support. "Thanks, Mark, but let's not worry about it too much. You can't choose your family, right?" The dinner with Mark's parents was just the start. The next day, we were invited to brunch, a chance, as Mark put it, to smooth things over a bit. I wasn't holding my breath, but I agreed, thinking maybe it was just first meeting jitters on their part. We arrived to find a lavish spread on the table. Linda was bustling around the kitchen, and George was reading the newspaper. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. "Morning," I greeted them, trying to sound cheerful. "Good morning, Rose," Linda replied with a tight smile. "Hope you're hungry." The conversation started off with safe topics, the weather, a recent local event. But it wasn't long before Linda's curiosity got the better of her. "So, Rose," she began, eyeing me over her coffee cup, "Mark tells us you're into poker?" I nodded. "Yeah, I play in tournaments sometimes. It's more of a hobby, really." Linda's eyes widened, and she almost choked on her coffee. "Like gambling?" Mark jumped in. "It's not gambling, Mom. It's a game of skill. Rose is very good at it." But Linda wasn't convinced. "Sounds like gambling to me. I hope you're not planning to squander Mark's earnings on your hobby." I felt my cheeks burn, but I kept my voice even. "I play with my own money, Mrs. Dawson. I've never been one to rely on others financially." There was an awkward pause before George chimed in, trying to change the subject. But the damage was done. The rest of the meal passed in uneasy silence. Later, in the living room, I noticed Linda furtively moving some items around. Her jewelry, I realized. She was hiding them, casting furtive glances my way. I couldn't believe it. "Mark, can I talk to you for a second?" I asked, pulling him aside. "What's up?" he asked, looking concerned. "Your mom's hiding her jewelry," I said quietly. "She thinks I'm going to steal it or something." Mark's face fell. "Oh no, I'm so sorry, Rose. I can't believe she'd think that." I shrugged, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "It's fine, I didn't expect this." The day ended with a heavy heart. On the drive back, Mark was apologetic. "I really thought they'd be more open-minded. I don't know what to say." "It's not your fault," I reassured him, though I couldn't help feeling hurt and judged. "Let's just give it some time. Maybe they'll come around." The tension between me and Mark's parents wasn't getting any better. After the jewelry hiding incident, I thought things couldn't get much worse. I was wrong. A few days later, we were back at his parents' place for a family barbecue. I was on edge, but Mark assured me it would be a casual, relaxed affair. "Just some burgers and beers," he had said. I should have known better. As soon as we arrived, Linda pulled Mark aside, leaving me standing awkwardly by the grill with George, who was more interested in his steaks than making conversation. I tried to break the ice. "Those look like they're going to be delicious, Mr. Dawson." He grunted. "Yep. Only way to do it. You cook much?" "Not as much as I'd like to. My job keeps me pretty busy." He nodded, clearly not interested in continuing the chat. I retreated to the patio, feeling out of place. That's when I overheard Linda's voice, tinged with urgency. She was talking to Mark, but her words carried across to me. "Can't be serious about this girl, Mark. She's not right for you. You need someone who can manage your lifestyle." Mark's response was firm. "Mom, I love Rose. She's smart, kind, and she's not after my money. Can't you just give her a chance?" Their conversation was cut short as other family members arrived, but the words stung. I tried to shake it off and be sociable, but the evening was a blur of strained smiles and polite, meaningless chatter. Later, as we were leaving, George pulled Mark aside, leaving me to say goodbye to Linda. She was polite but distant. "Thank you for coming, Rose. It was nice to have you." I forced a smile. "Thanks for having me, Mrs. Dawson. Have a good evening." In the car, Mark was quiet, his jaw set in frustration. I reached over, squeezing his hand. "Hey, it's okay. We knew it wasn't going to be easy." He sighed, glancing at me. "I just don't get it. They're not usually like this. It's like they've made up their mind about you without even trying to know you." I shrugged. "Some people have their ideas about how things should be. It's hard to change that." Mark looked determined. "Well, I'm not giving up. They'll have to accept you, Rose. You're the one I want to be with." His words were comforting, but a part of me wondered if we were fighting a losing battle. It felt like every attempt to bridge the gap with his parents only widened it further. As we drove home in silence, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease about what lay ahead for us. Despite Mark's reassurances, I felt like an outsider, unwelcome and constantly judged. Things came to a head during a Sunday dinner at his parents' house, a dinner that would become the most heated yet. We were barely through the appetizer when Linda began her usual line of questioning. "So, Rose, Mark tells us you're still working at that library. Don't you aspire for something more substantial?" I clenched my fork, trying to keep my tone even. "I love my job, Mrs. Dawson. It's fulfilling, and I get to be surrounded by what I love. Books." "But surely you must think about the future," she pressed, "about being a suitable partner for Mark." Mark cut in, his voice firm. "Mom, Rose is more than suitable. She's her own person with her own passions. That's one of the reasons I love her." George, who'd been quietly observing until now, joined in. "Mark, we're just concerned. You come from a certain lifestyle, and well, Rose doesn't fit into that." I couldn't hold back any longer. "Mr. Dawson, with all due respect, I don't need to fit into anything. I'm not a puzzle piece, I'm a person." Mark looked at me, then at his parents. "Exactly. Rose isn't here to play a role. She's here because I love her." Linda's face was a mix of shock and disapproval. "Love is fine and dandy, but it doesn't pay the bills, Mark. It doesn't uphold a certain standard." Mark's tone was getting sharper. "A standard that I never asked for. I've told you, I'm not interested in maintaining an image just for the sake of appearances." The conversation escalated, voices raised in frustration. I felt trapped, caught in a crossfire of expectations and prejudices. Finally, Mark stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Enough. I can't do this anymore. We're leaving." I followed him, my heart pounding, as he said goodbye to his visibly shaken parents. Outside, the air was cool, a stark contrast to the heated atmosphere we'd just left. Mark was silent as he drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Mark, I'm sorry," I said, my voice small. "I didn't mean to cause a scene." He glanced at me, his expression softening. "Rose, it's not your fault. I'm tired of trying to defend our relationship. It shouldn't be this hard." I nodded, feeling a mix of sadness and frustration. "I know, but maybe this is for the best. We can't keep trying to please everyone." Mark sighed, a sound filled with weariness. "You're right. I love you, Rose, and that's what matters, not their approval." Mark and I had decided to keep our distance from his parents for a while, but that plan was short-lived. A call from Linda, laden with urgency, brought us back to their doorstep. The air was thick with anticipation as we sat down in their living room, which felt unusually stiff. "Mark, Rose, we have something to say," Linda began, her voice unusually soft, almost rehearsed. "We've been thinking," George added, "and we realize we may have been a bit harsh towards Rose." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Oh, what's brought on this change of heart?" It was Linda who answered, a hint of eagerness in her voice. "Well, we did a little digging, and we discovered Rose's background. Her father, Charles Harrington. What a revelation!" My stomach churned at her words. "And how exactly does my father's identity change anything?" George chimed in, his tone suddenly warm, almost overzealous. "It shows you're from a respectable family, Rose. We see now that you're not just after Mark's wealth." Mark's face darkened. "So her worth is tied to her family's wealth? Is that it?" Linda rushed to explain, her words tumbling out in a flurry. No, it's not like that. We just see that she's one of us." The hypocrisy of their words was staggering. "You mean to say," I began, my voice steady despite the anger boiling inside, "that my value as a person, as your son's partner, hinges on my family's financial status?" Mark stood up, his voice laced with disappointment. "This isn't right. You judged her without knowing her, and now you're welcoming her with open arms because of her family name. That's hypocritical." Linda looked taken aback, her facade slipping. "But we're just trying to—" Mark cut her off. "It's clear now. Rose's identity, her character, none of that mattered to you until you found out about her father." The room fell into a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Linda and George seemed to shrink back, their earlier warmth replaced by a dawning realization of their shallow judgment. As we got up to leave, Linda's voice was a desperate whisper. "Please, Rose, Mark, can't we start over?" But it was too late. The charade of their sudden kindness only served to highlight the stark contrast with their previous disdain. As we walked out, I felt a strange mix of victory and sadness. Their acceptance, now offered so freely, felt hollow and insincere. In the car, Mark's grip on the steering wheel betrayed his frustration. "I'm so sorry, Rose. I never wanted you to go through this." I smiled weakly, looking out the window. "It's okay, Mark. It's not your fault. We saw their true colors, and that's enough for us to move forward, together." Driving away, the image of Linda and George's forced smiles and feigned warmth lingered in my mind. Their hypocrisy had drawn a clear line, one that Mark and I were unwilling to cross. In the aftermath of our last visit to Mark's parents, the air around us felt different, lighter, yet filled with a sense of resolution. We were sitting on our favorite bench in the park, a place that had become our haven for honest conversations and quiet reflection. Mark broke the silence. "I've been thinking, Rose. About us, my parents, everything." I nodded. "Yeah, me too. It's been a lot to process." He took my hand, his gaze earnest. "I know we can't change how they feel or what they think, but I don't want to lose what we have because of them." I squeezed his hand, feeling a surge of affection. "I don't want that either. We've got something special, Mark. Your parents' opinions don't define us." He smiled, that warm, comforting smile I had fallen in love with. "Exactly. So, I was thinking, why don't we start planning our future? Just the two of us, the way we want it." The idea brought a smile to my face. "I like that. No outside pressures, no trying to fit into anyone's mold, just us, making our own path." Mark's eyes lit up. "Exactly. We could travel, see the world, maybe even enter a few international poker tournaments together." I laughed, the sound echoing in the open space. "That sounds perfect. But let's not forget the simple things too. Burgers at our favorite joint, lazy Sundays on this very bench." He leaned in, kissing me gently. "Wouldn't have it any other way." As we sat there, making plans and dreaming of our future, I realized how far we'd come. We'd faced judgment, hypocrisy, and pressure, but we'd come out stronger for it. Our love wasn't just about the big, grand gestures. It was in the everyday moments, the small acts of understanding and acceptance. "I have to say, though," Mark said, a mischievous glint in his eye, "our wedding is going to be quite the event. How do you feel about a library-themed wedding?" I burst out laughing. "A wedding surrounded by books? You really do get me, Mark Dawson.